A good thing here is every company can own their own warehouses. So if I am manufacturing widgets, I'm manufacturing laptops, I can have my own warehouses for manufacturing laptops. Well, yes, that's a very simple option. But sometimes it may not feasible for me due to various reasons. One is operating warehouses these days is a very highly technical issue, and you need to be a specialist to be able to manage your own warehouses. And I may not be a very large player to, so that I can own my own warehouse. It doesn't make sense for me. And so besides these captive self-owned warehouses, we have two different type of warehouse arrangements that are possible to us. The first thing is what we call as contract warehouse. Now, in a contract warehouse, what I'm essentially doing is I am contracting out the space. So let's say I'm a manufacturer who is manufacturing some water bottles or any object that you could think of. In that case, let's say my operation is huge. I'm a large company. I could contract out a warehouse, and where the warehouse operator merely gives me the space, the racks, and the physical infrastructure, and my people operate and manage the warehouses. So, generally speaking, the idea of a contract warehouse is the idea that we rent out the space and the physical infrastructure, but the operation is still with the client or the customer company who is storing the materials. Now, these contract warehouses become very beneficial to large companies if they need temporary space or if they need temporary infrastructure, if they're testing out entry into the new market, whatever reasons. But because they're large, they can afford to have their own staff, and because they can afford even to have their intelligence necessary to operate these warehouses, and they can save on capital cost for some time and go for contract warehousing. The other is what we call as 3PL warehouses. Now, in 3PL warehouses, the warehousing operations are controlled by the 3PL staff and not by the customer company. So, as a customer company, I would probably, when I rent a 3PL warehouse, whether I rent a full warehouse or whether I rent some pallet spaces, so I can say, hey, in this warehouse, I need 30 pallet spaces. So, I can rent 30 pallet spaces in that warehouse. Whenever I rent 30 pallet spaces, the operations are handled by warehouse operators. So let's say I need some dispatches. So I would create a dispatch order, send it to the 3PL warehouses. The 3PL warehouse people would pick up the material and create the documentation necessary and then prepare it for shipment. So this is an essential difference between the contract warehouse and a 3PL warehouse. Remember, a 3PL warehouse, I don't have control over actually who picks the material or what is the exact process used to pick the material. In ideal cases, because 3PL people are specialists, they should do it better than what I as a customer would be able to do it. But again, the point remains that we as customers don't have control as much as a 3PL warehouse. But when we have a captive, our own warehouse, or when you have a contract warehouse, we retain 100% control over the activities, processes, the safety procedures, or whatever are necessary for our products. And the last type of warehouses I want to introduce here are the refrigerated warehouses or temperature controlled warehouses or reefer warehouses. Now, one thing I've noticed is when you talk of reefer warehouses, the essential belief is, well, it's a huge thing which refrigerated cold space. No, it's very different because reefers are a technical domain in their own right. Now, just to give you an example, different type of goods need very different type of temperature arrangements. So for example, let's talk of fresh fruits. Now, fresh fruits demand a very different type of arrangements. So for example, they demand a temperature from 32 degrees Fahrenheit, which is freezing, to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. The humidity levels are required are different. Then in some cases, take the example of bananas. Well, you can't chill bananas because bananas, once they are cooled to some extent, they turn dark. So you don't want to do that. You have to maintain bananas at a very different kind of environment. In some cases, let's say apples and some other products, well, they ripen. So to prevent the ripen, we remove oxygen from the atmosphere or reduce the oxygen and flush the cold storage with nitrogen so that the rate of perspiration and metabolism for these fruits reduces and they stay fresh. So just to give you an idea, according to the different type of fruits or foods that we are going to store in the warehouses, the cold storage warehouses need to change. The same, to give you another example, frozen foods. There is a vast range in frozen foods also, but typically when we talk of frozen foods, we are talking of 0 degrees Fahrenheit, which is negative 18 degrees Celsius. So the goods have to be stored at this temperature continuously so that they remain viable food products to be consumed by consumer at a later storage. So just to give you a peek, little bit of insight into how cold storages are, and because of the refrigeration, obviously they're very expensive spaces. You would see a little bit closer aisles. You don't want to waste space inside a warehouse to cool empty air. Yeah, there are different types of products. We've just given you examples of two, and each of them would have their very specific requirement for cold storage warehouse. Now, when I say that I stop at this, I'm not saying that these are the only type of warehousing. There are many different type of warehouses. For example, there are tool rooms where we store tools. There are specific warehouses for pharmaceutical product. There are liquid farms, which are warehouses for storage of petroleum or different type of liquids. Well, we might come across these different type of warehouses in this course, but at this point, this is the idea that is good enough for us to know about the different types of locations we have studied according to their position in the supply chain, according to the purpose and the specific task that the warehousing does.